How's it going, everyone? Today I'm going to be doing my player card review for the Falcon Hero Pack. I'll be reviewing all of the new aspect and basic cards that came in this hero pack, discussing them in the context of power level. How are these cards going to contribute towards winning games, adding win rates to certain decks, or maybe creating new archetypes, new decks with good win rates. We'll talk about every card in the pack, but then at the end I'll do my usual top 5 ranking of the cards that I think will be most influential from a power level perspective. So if you've got these cards already, or you'd like to buy everything, you'll get a sense of what are some powerful things I can do with these cards. Or if you've got a more limited collection, or you're a newer player, hopefully you'll see if this is a good pack for you based on some of the powerful options there might be. So one thing I'll say off the bat, this is kind of an interesting pack, this Falcon Hero Pack. The starter deck comes with a pretty cohesive deck, this aerial strategy with lots of aerial allies and a couple cards that reward us for having aerial allies. So those cards are kind of a package deal. I'll say shortly kind of what I think about the power level of that package. There's not quite as many cards that can just sort of go into any old deck. And for what it's worth, I do like that they design a hero pack in this way. But I think the overall power level for this pack is a bit lower than some of the other ones. So we'll go through them and say kind of why that is. But there's a couple standouts that we'll get to at the end. And I forgot to mention, I will talk about the reprints in this pack as well, especially if you are a newer player, maybe getting your hands on some of these cards for the first time. Hopefully that can help inform your decision if this is the right hero pack that you want to buy. As always, if you think I've missed something when evaluating a card, or if I've had some oversight, please let me know your thoughts. And I'd like to learn maybe any successes you've been having with these cards, or any interesting ideas you have with them that I've missed. So starting off with the cards that did not make my top 5 in the leadership aspect. Let's start with Flight Squadron. So I wanted to start with this one because this really captures the core of a lot of cards in this Falcon Hero Pack with what the cards are trying to do, what archetype they play into. So Flight Squadron, this is a 2-cost leadership support. It's a team card, play only if your identity has the aerial trait, max 1 team card per player. If each of your allies has the aerial trait, increase your ally limit by 1, and this card gains response after you play an aerial card. Exhaust this card to ready an ally you control. Okay, there's a lot going on here. So first of all, notably, this only really does anything if each of your allies has the aerial trait. So right off the bat, this is a pretty severe restriction on the kind of deck we're going to make. Now, it can be worth it if the card's powerful enough, but maybe let's come back to this point. But in general, just aerial allies on their own, when we think about the best allies in the game, very few of them are aerial, like Nick, Mockingbird, Professor X, Beast. We're not necessarily like marginally changing a deck that's already very powerful to make this card work. This is really sort of defining its own archetype. So the strength of this card is really kind of one and the same with the strength of this ally-heavy archetype as a whole. So then this card does 2 things, assuming we meet that condition. 1, it increases our ally limit by 1. So this is, right, if we just wanted that effect, we could just play the Triskelion. This is a 1-cost card that does the same thing. Generally not a huge fan of increasing our ally limit. I mean, in terms of like spending resources to do that, because if we're at the point where we have full allies, like that's a game that's already going pretty well for us. There's not that many games that we're going to sort of tip over the edge by getting 4 allies in play as opposed to 3. So on its own, I don't think it's a huge impact, although especially in this aerial archetype, if we're playing lots of aerial allies, there are a good number of aerial allies that exhaust for value without using up their hit points. So in this case, we might want to keep 1 or 2 of those in play while we're cycling through the other ally slots with allies that are blocking. So there's some justification. You can see kind of what it's doing here in the aerial package. But again, I just don't think it's a huge payoff overall. And then the bigger part of the card is this response. After you play an aerial card, exhaust this card, ready an ally you control. And I've talked a lot about ally readying or ally healing in my various strategy videos and in my previous card reviews. The thing to remember, sort of talk about it once now. It'll come up in a few cards down the road, but readying an ally without healing it is only contributing positive tempo. The efficiency, the value we're going to get out of an ally is defined by its hit points. Readying that ally will let us burn through those hit points faster, but we shouldn't really treat it as positive value in the same way that other effects have positive value, like straight up just doing damage or removing threat. So this card, we're readying an ally, which is not worth nothing. Like, there is a little bit of tempo, but right, it's not like I get a free use of an ally when I play an aerial card. So in that sense, right, it is just a tempo boosting card, but right, on a card that's costing us 3 ER to put into play, like that's kind of a tempo hit. So we want to take this tempo hit to play a card that's going to incrementally boost our tempo in subsequent turns. I'm not sure about that. Now, like I said before, there are some aerial allies that get value from exhausting that does not use up their consequential damage, that does not cost them consequential damage, does not use up their hit points. So we'll talk about Cloud9 or Arrow or Cannonball. It is not in the Falcon pack, but Cannonball is an older ally who can exhaust without taking consequential damage if we've got enough aerial allies in hand. So for these cards, readying them actually does contribute positive value. So that's really where we want to try to use this ally readying effect. But at the end of the day, how much better actually is this than just playing Command Team, which we already have? It's the same cost, and we get 3 readies out of it. By the time we get more than 3 readies out of Flight Squadron, that's quite late in the game. We can already play 3 copies of Command Team. Is it worth restricting our allies to be strictly aerial in order to get this effect? I'm currently at a no. At least in terms of thinking about the most powerful things we can do, the sort of strategies that are really going to unlock some win percentage that we didn't have already. I think it's a very unique, interesting deck to make, where we've got all these aerial allies. There's, of course, a handful of other leadership cards that pay off having a lot of aerial cards. We mentioned Cannonball, there's Air Supremacy. Flying Formation is technically a payoff, but that's a pretty weak card. And overall, I'm just not super invested in this archetype as a way to win a higher percentage of games. Let me know if you've been having success with that archetype. Really, sorry, I'm talking a lot about this card at the start, but really, this will help me go faster through some other cards because I'm just not a believer in this archetype, not putting it in my top 5. Fun deck to play once in a while. Play it at a local event. Maybe you're only playing Standard or Expert. I mean, it should do fine, but just not an archetype I'm crazy about. Okay, spent long enough on that card there, so let's try to keep it moving here. Next, let's talk about a couple aerial allies. Let's start with Arrow. Like I mentioned this one. This is one of the allies that can exhaust for value without taking damage. But this is a 3-cost leadership ally with 1 thwart, 1 attack, and 3 hit points. Traits are Aerial and Agent of Atlas. So the hero action, Exhaust Arrow. Choose a player. Until the end of the phase, each aerial character that player controls gets +1 attack. So this is a perfect mirror of the card Cloud9, which came out in the Ironheart Hero Pack, which basically is the same thing except replace +1 attack for +1 thwart. So we've got some context already to evaluate these cards. And really, same as Flight Squadron, the place for Arrow is really in a heavily aerial deck, and we need to be playing an aerial hero as well to get the full value out of this. And, on the one hand, it is an infinite value ceiling when we don't have to use up the hit points of our ally, right? We can do this every turn. Say it's buffing 1 or 2 characters for 10 turns in a row. That is incredible efficiency at a very slow pace, of course, but right, that does have a sort of efficiency upside that we might expect to get over a resource generating support or upgrade, for example. But I think the real knock against Arrow is she's only really doing that if we've got a few other aerial characters in play. If she's the first ally of the game we're playing, that's incredibly weak. We're only going to get 1 point of value from her on that turn she comes down. And right, I'm very, very picky about allies because there's so many incredibly powerful allies in the game. So, right, again, it kind of goes with if this whole aerial package was a very strong thing to do, Arrow would be one of the critical pieces of this because she's aerial herself. She rewards you for having other aerial characters in play. But I think when you just put it all together, you look at what needs to come together, the sort of raw, just efficiency output is really not as good as just playing the best generic staple allies, or just playing a team of like Avengers or X-Men, for example, which have much stronger team cards. Okay, next up we've got Spectrum. I do think Spectrum definitely has more legs on her own, but she's a 5-cost ally with 1 thwart, 1 attack, 3 health, aerial and Avenger traits. Response: after you play Spectrum, tuck 1 card used to pay for her under her. If that card's printed resource has a mental, she gets +2 thwart, a physical, she gets +2 attack, an energy, she gets +2 hit points, or a wild, get all of the above. So basically goes without saying, like, we shouldn't really be playing Spectrum unless we are very confident we can get a wild under her. 5 cost for a 3 thwart or 3 attack ally with only 3 health. That's pretty below the curve. We could get the same with Snowguard, who costs 4, which Snowguard is a fair rate, and allies with 3 thwart or 3 attack, like, they play pretty well with healing effects. They turn cards like First Aid into pretty efficient sources of long-term damage or threat removal. But right, we could just be playing Snowguard, and there's plenty of allies, especially in leadership, that are gonna sort of hit our baseline efficiency plus give us a little bit more. So Spectrum is just a little bit lacking if she only gets the thwart or attack buff. The energy +2 hit points buff is even worse, right? 1 thwart, 1 attack for 4 uses plus a block is pretty far below rate. That would be standard for like a 3-cost ally, honestly. So we're overpaying for that by 2. So really where we want to be is with Wild. And with a Wild, with all of these bonuses, she is legitimately a lot of value. That's 3 thwart, 3 attack, 5 hit points. So that's going to be 4 uses of a 3 thwart or 3 attack power. Call that 12 total points of value, which is worth like 6 resources. And then a block is worth 2 resources. So this is like 8 resources of value for a 6 ER card. So legitimately a lot of value. It just, again, comes down to I'm very picky when it comes to allies. We've got some maybe trait synergies. Aerial a little bit. Avenger is a good trait. Avenger's Tower can help maybe reduce her cost by 1. Various Avenger payoff cards, Captain America, Mighty Avengers if we want to play the team card. But right, it's so expensive, and it has a conditional. Granted, not that the conditional is that hard to meet. We could have Power of Leadership. We could have various. There's quite a lot of basic single wild icon resources that we could maybe play. Innovation, effective leadership. Like, there's definitely some options to make it work. But there's so many allies that just really don't ask anything else of us than to just play them, get their stats, and so I couldn't put Spectrum in my top 10, in my top 5. This is the kind of high value card that does get better in multiplayer. So in multiplayer, we can have some players sort of make the long-term high value plays, while other players sort of get cheap allies or make the faster tempo plays to deal with encounter cards. It's just more flexible in the game as a whole. So I think Spectrum is a little bit better. Her value can be better realized in multiplayer. In a solo game, this is spending pretty much your whole turn. You're not going to want to block with her right away. There's pretty few encounter cards that she's going to answer with 1 activation. So a bit riskier in solo. So if you want to play her, maybe look to multiplayer. Notably, she really doesn't synergize that well with many of the leadership staples. Rapid response, make the call, call for backup. None of these cards will get her in play in a way that lets you tuck a card from hand under her. So she'll have just the baseline 1 thwart, 1 attack, 3 health stats, which is of course very bad. So especially that as like a tiebreaker with other allies like a Giant Man or War Machine or something that play much better with those cards. I think that's enough to maybe not be super high on Spectrum. Okay, next up we've got a leadership upgrade. This is Wingman, a 0-cost upgrade attached to an aerial ally, max 1 per ally. Interrupt when another aerial ally would take any amount of consequential damage. Exhaust attached ally, prevent 1 of that damage. This is another very high efficiency ceiling card, right? We basically turn one ally into like a permanent heal station, heal 1 from an ally every single turn. And that's, that's unbounded value. Healing an ally gives us 2 points of value, maybe 2 thwart or 2 attack every turn, sort of infinitely, as long as we keep this battery together. So like that is good value output, but you just have to think about what we've invested to do this, right? We've spent an ally who we're not going to block with. We've put 1 resource on top with Wingman. I mean, that's not too bad, but it is a resource. And then the ally that we're healing, first of all, just the fact that we need another ally out is going to sort of cap the usefulness here. Cards that need other stuff going on for them to be good are inherently a little worse than cards that do something on their own. But that ally is probably an ally who, we're not going to get their value from blocking for a while. So kind of, losing some tempo there, losing tempo on the ally that we attach Wingman to. Yes, in a very long game, especially maybe if we've got Flight Squadron getting us some extra readies. Maybe this is one of those cases where we can extract some extra value out of this. But just compared to other strategies where we can just get a lot more value up front, I think that's generally more valuable. Okay, last leadership card outside my top 5 is Captain America's Shield. Really exciting card. This is a I'm looking at it wrong here. Actually, Captain America is the card you can actually put in your deck. This is a 0-cost leadership upgrade. Play only if you are the Bucky Barnes or Sam Wilson player. Hero action, exhaust Captain America and spend a physical resource. Find Captain America's shield and add it to your hand. If it leaves play this way, deal 4 damage to an enemy. And Captain America's shield is a linked card, which means that it starts outside your deck. It only can come into play via the Captain America upgrade. And it's the same as Captain America's shield in Steve Rogers' Hero Pack, which is a 1-cost upgrade that gives you hero +1 defense and retaliate 1. So I actually do really like this card. I didn't put it in my top 5 just because there's only 2 eligible heroes and you have to be playing leadership with them. So by definition of my list, it's not a terribly influential card. But I think you'll basically play this card whenever you're playing leadership with either of those heroes. So Captain America, it's 0 to come into play. So 0, it's a phenomenal cost. Really easy to fit in on any turn. And then at some point, you can spend a physical resource to get the shield. I wouldn't do that until you can also spend a second resource to actually put the shield into play. And so that alone is kind of not, you don't get that much. 2 resources. By this point, you paid 3 resources for the shield, +1 defense, retaliate 1. Not quite worth it. But now, on a later turn, we have this ability to use that Captain America hero action, spend a physical resource. Now, when we put Captain America's shield into our hand from play, we deal 4 damage to an enemy. And in that case, we've spent 1 resource, and we've kind of taken back 1 resource as well. Or let me put it this way. If we were to return to that game state, we would spend 1 physical resource and then 1 resource again to replay the shield. We basically convert that into 4 damage, which is very efficient. It's an efficient exchange, and that kind of damage on demand is really nice for, whenever we might draw a large minion. Now, on any given turn, like our damage output is much higher, and we can really save it for when that's going to matter. So really, outside of this, 1 cost or 1 ER, put Captain America into play, do nothing. Outside of that, we've got an efficient exchange of 2 resources for 4 damage that we can do every turn if we want, or just like save it for the turn where we've got a big minion coming out. And really, that all works pretty well. With Falcon and Winter Soldier, I don't think the +1 defense and retaliate, it's not a huge deal. I mean, Falcon has draw their fire, which lets him defend for everyone in a multiplayer game. In that case, it would definitely be nice to have the shield out. If you're really built around that card, you're probably playing protection though, not leadership. So you might not have access to this. And then just Bucky is not really defending all that much, really likes to attack. So not a huge card there, but I think just the Captain America upgrade being a damage source is very strong. All right, so we've got one card here that is a non-leadership card that did not make it into my top 5, and this is Misty Knight. This is a 4-cost Justice ally, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 3 health, hero for hire trait. As an interrupt, when Misty Knight thwarts, look at the top 2 cards of the encounter deck and discard one of those cards. Misty Knight gets +1 thwart for this thwart for each icon, so counting stars and boost icons, in the discarded card's boost area. So obviously it's a bit of a roll of the dice. We don't know exactly what we're going to get. We should pretty much always get 1, but we really want to hit 2 for this to be kind of standard efficiency. But even if we hit 2 every time, like she thwarts for 3 twice, she blocks, that's baseline efficiency. So nothing too special. There's plenty of allies that can give us baseline efficiency with a much higher floor. So I'm just not that interested in Misty Knight. She can only really thwart effectively. Her attack is super weak, and she has a very irrelevant trait in the hero for hire. So yeah, she's got a pretty nice ceiling compared to other allies. We might hit like a 3 boost. It could even be a 4 boost card where she's really thwarting for a lot. But especially with thwarting, I mean, say we've got like a 3 threat side scheme. Like if that's our way to really thwart that side scheme, like we're gonna waste any extra. So she doesn't even make use of her upside all the time. Very low floor, irrelevant trait. Sorry, Misty, but I think this might actually be the weakest card in this pack. All right, so moving on to my top 5. Once again, the way I define this is the top 5 most influential cards from a power level perspective. So I basically let that encompass, some cards might contribute marginal power to a lot of heroes. I put that on relatively even footing with a card that maybe only a few heroes can maximize it, but it's like a huge game changer for those heroes. So obviously there's some subjectivity, but I'm trying to balance these various things. So at number 5, I've got a Resource Reserve. This is a 1-cost leadership support. Location trait, max 1 per player. Any player may spend the resource card tucked here as if it were in their hand. As an action, exhaust Resource Reserve, tuck 1 resource card from your hand under here to a maximum of 1. So this is a card that I would classify as a smoothing card or a floor raising card, right? Because on the one hand, right, we're spending 2 ER to really do nothing. I mean, that 2 ER, we don't get any sort of tempo or anything, but it has the promise that on future turns, we're gonna let very few resource cards go to waste. If we've got an extra resource card in hand, we can tuck it under here and sort of roll that value into a future turn and not waste it. So again, there's sort of diminishing returns when we play too many floor raising cards. Like there are ways in the game to spend our extra resources already with like Plan B or Machine Man, or just playing cards like Assess the Situation to help roll, smooth out our turns, turn over turn. But I really like the implication of this one, first of all, in multiplayer. So in multiplayer, this says any player may spend the resource card tucked here as if it was in their hand. So only the player who controls it can put resource cards under there, but this can really smooth out a lot at the table. Helping someone get their extra resource that lets them fully play out their hand when otherwise a card or 2 might have gone to waste. The amount of combinations, the likelihood that someone can really benefit from that extra resource is a lot higher in a multiplayer game. Moreover, some of the strongest cards in the game are the resource cards, right? Either double resources or they're providing 1 resource plus a boost because, right, they're being a resource for another card, but they're also giving you some kind of value. So I think this card lets you push into just playing more resource cards in your deck, which are excellent cards, but then it really mitigates your floor of like drawing, having a resource card left over in your resource heavy hand because you didn't have enough to do with it. So, it's not like a slam dunk kind of card, but and honestly, I haven't quite gotten to play with it yet, but just thinking about what it does, I think it's deserving of at least the number 5 spot on my list. Going on to number 4, we've got the protection card that came in the Falcon pack. This is Ops Room. This is a shield card, this is a 2-cost protection support. It does have the shield trait, so relevant for a few reasons there. Has 3 uses, they're called alert counters. As an interrupt, when a friendly character would take any amount of damage while defending, remove 1 alert counter from here, prevent 1 of that damage, and remove 1 threat from a scheme. So very reminiscent of Energy Barriers, one of Protection's best cards, same cost, upgrade instead of a support, and it deals damage instead of removing threat. So that card is already very good. I play that card a lot. It is a tech, which does give it a lot of extra synergies, but Ops Room has the shield trait, which has some of its own synergies, like Sky Destroyer or Government Liaison. So sort of even there, ultimately tech is still better because of repurpose, but when we look at the effect, in general, removing threat from a scheme is harder to come by in Protection than dealing damage to an enemy. Now, this isn't going to magically solve all of Protection's, threat worries, side schemes still being the biggest nemesis of Protection, where we want to like thwart for 5 in one chunk. This will chip away threat here and there, but when we put it all together, like the value is just really solid. Preventing 3 damage, removing 3 threat from a scheme, very fair for a 3 resource investment. Now, the other notable restriction on this card is that unlike Energy Barrier, this only can prevent a damage when a friendly character is defending. So in Protection, we can build a deck that's going to defend fairly often. I don't think it's a huge downside, but just note that is, more conditional than Energy Barrier. But I think it's just a solid value card. I'm a really big fan. I've really come down on doing the perfect defense strategy in a way where we're buffing our defense stat, because it's just inevitable we always end up wasting resources buffing our defense, and then the boost is like a 0 card. I'd much rather be reactive with preventing damage, because then I know exactly how many resources I need to spend doing that, and then I can play out my turn more efficiently. So I'm a big fan of this, probably alongside Energy Barrier in a deck that can just perfectly defend, never taking damage, and using cards like this to chip in some value along the way. Next up at number 3, we've got Hugin and Moonin. This is a 2-cost leadership ally with 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 health. It's got 3 traits, Aerial, Asgard, and Bird. As a response, after Hugin and Moonin enter play, search the top 10 cards of the encounter deck for a minion and put it into play engaged with you. So that's a cost, and then ready as a effect, ready 1 character you control for each icon, again counting boost, the stars and the boost icon in that minion's boost area. So first thing, just right off the bat, I forget this all the time, so in case you haven't recognized this, this is not a forced response. When a card like this just has a response, we can totally ignore it if we want. So the floor of this card is just a 2-cost, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 health ally, which is definitely below rate. Like, we would never play a card just to do that, but at least, you don't have to engage a minion when you do this. But in general, I think you're going to play this in a deck where you do want to engage a minion. And let's sort of walk through that a little bit. So say we get a minion, we get to ready a character for each icon we see in their boost area. So the only necessarily free ready is going to be for our hero. And our hero readying alone, right, generally that's not going to be enough to defeat a minion. Now we could ready additional allies, like we talked about before, not necessarily giving value, so we can't quite count that as like additional thwarting or attacking that we wouldn't otherwise have. but maybe it does help us on the tempo to sort of defeat this minion we've drawn. But again, we can't really pat ourselves on the back for quickly solving a problem that we made for ourselves, right? We engaged this minion. We should only be doing that if we're going to get more out of it than we would have had not doing it. And so really, there's a handful of use cases for this card and why I've put it at number 3. So first of all, obviously just it's allowing us to engage a minion. So Thor is really looking for ways to do this. Valkyrie wants to have minions in play. Winter Soldier, as a filming when we just got to see Tigra for the first time. I think Tigra would probably be better in aggression or protection, but this is another way for her to engage minions in leadership. I guess actually now that I think about it, she has a tutorable way to find a minion every single turn. So I don't know how good it is for Tigra. But right, Thor, Valkyrie, love to see this card as a way to engage a minion and make sure that we can, in Thor's case, we'll draw 2 cards. So that should, net us better value, should net us more value than it costs to kill the minion on average. And then in Valkyrie, Valkyrie just doesn't even work if there's not minions in play. So good to get some minions in play. For both of those heroes in particular, this is a rare ally that has the Asgard trait. So that's really exciting for them. Both of these heroes can sometimes play team building exercise or organizational support, cards that pay them off for just having other cards in play that share a trait with the identity. So Asgard being that trait is just nice. Then we can also search for it with the Bifrost. So especially in leadership, there's really not that many allies that we can search up with the Bifrost. So having this, to do that, and especially like for Thor, and I guess for Valkyrie to be fair, but being an ally, it's searchable by the Bifrost. We can recall it from the discard pile with Make the Call. So now this card gives Thor way more consistency for engaging a minion during the player phase in leadership. We do have Squared Off already. Squared Off is good, a little situational as well, but just even more consistency to having minions engaged. This is also a bird, so bird is marginally relevant for Falcon. After playing with Falcon, Falcon really can pretty much always get Red Wing, so I don't know if adding a bird to the deck is actually a huge difference, but it is somewhat relevant for Falcon. And then, of course, we got the aerial trait, which makes it relevant for some other aerial things. And then lastly, there are 3 traits here, so there's a card we'll talk about soon that might care about that. This is definitely a card that's more of like a high ceiling in the hands of a few heroes as opposed to just a staple that can go in every deck. Because like I said, I don't think engaging that minion is generally worth the effect you get out of it. But I think it's, it does enough little things in these different places that I put it at number 3. Going from number 3 to number 2, this is a pretty big gap in influence, I think. These top 2 cards are really, I think, the hallmarks of this pack. 3 through 5, even some of the ones outside my top 5, you could probably shift them around a little bit in order, and I wouldn't argue with you too much. But these, I really think to a T are the top 2 cards. So at number 2, I'm going to go with Winter Soldier. This is a 3-cost aggression ally. 1 thwart, 2 attack, 3 health, shield and soldier traits. Response after Winter Soldier attacks and defeats an enemy, remove 2 threat from a scheme. So really not too much to say here. This is just absolutely ridiculous value. Attack twice for 2. So, Winter Soldier passes my baseline efficiency test, right? Even if you never did his response, he could attack for 2 twice, block. That would be totally fine. Now, if he kills 1 minion, that's 2 threat removed from a scheme. Kills 2 minions, that's 4 threat removed from a scheme. Just absolutely ridiculous value, especially in an aspect aggression that has a hard time removing threat from schemes. Shield trait, soldier trait, shield trait is a sometimes relevant trait, not maybe as good as if this were like an X-Men or something. X-Men is an incredibly strong trait to have. Not as many payoffs for shield, but it is something. There's Government Liaison and Sky Destroyer. The only thing I can maybe argue against this card is that we have a lot of incentives in the game for letting your hero kill a minion. And this would be Bucky killing the minion. So we would have to give up on some of those. So like Hall of Heroes or Blood Rage, Chase Them Down. You know, these are some staple cards that only trigger if our hero kills a minion. So we kind of have to pick going in, which one are we committing to? Are we committing to Bucky being able to kill minions, or are we all in on our hero killing minions? And in general, not every deck is all in on heroes, on the hero killing minions. So I don't think it's that hard to swing Winter Soldier in there, to go away from that strategy. You could still play Winter Soldier and a few copies of Chase Them Down and not feel like a huge loss in value. But yeah, just an incredible card. Great threat removal, in aggression, very high floor, very good ceiling. So just a no-brainer. Honestly, could have maybe been number one, but I wanted to save my number one card to be sort of what I view as kind of like the flagship card of this pack, which is Strength in Diversity. Completely new archetype defining. Well, actually, I'll get back to that point in a second, but completely unique card, really, really exciting card. And so let's talk about it here. So this is a 2 cost per player card. So it costs 2 per player in the game. This is a leadership event, has alliance, so other players in your multiplayer game can help you pay the costs. And as a hero action for each different trait on friendly characters in play, choose either remove 1 threat from a scheme or deal 1 damage to an enemy. So if we just think about the numbers a little bit first, let's just start with solo, because I really do think solo is where this card is at its best, and kind of actively gets bad at like 3 or 4 players, might still be okay at 2 players. But just in a solo game, we're spending 3 ER, and for that cost, we generally want, 6 points of value would be the gold standard, some combination of 6 threat, 6 damage. But being an event, we don't necessarily expect that high of value all the time, so I'd be okay with 5 points of value. And if 4 was the floor, that would be okay, but not super exciting. So let's see, what do we actually need to get that? So let's assume we're playing this in a hero that's got 2 traits. Say Falcon, is Avenger and Aerial. There's tons of heroes in the game that have 2 traits. Say we have 1 ally in play with 2 more unique traits. That's already 4 points of value with 1 ally in play. So like if the literal floor of this card is like 2 points of value, I think it's realistic to have 1 ally in play, and you'll often have 2 allies in play. So really getting this up to 4 or 5 points is not that hard. And really just with a little bit of consideration in picking your allies to maximize this card, it can be really easy to hit 6 points of value with 2 allies in play. And of course, the ceiling is even higher as we think about getting up to 3 allies in play. So, all right, first let's just talk about, there's kind of 2 ways to think about this card. One is if we want to build our whole deck around it. 2 is if we just want to put this into an existing deck, or maybe just fudge the allies slightly in an existing deck to maximize this card. Because we want to be careful. We don't want to completely sacrifice the quality, the efficiency of the allies we're playing in order to get a point or 2 more value off of this. Like playing like Maria Hill and Mockingbird and Nick Fury, right? These are allies that share the shield and spy traits. But like it's still probably just better to play these 3 allies than to play some weaker allies with really offbeat, traits that are not going to overlap with our other allies in our deck. So, right, we can go pretty hard on playing like, Atlas Bear has the Posse and Wakanda traits, very unique. Kalu's actually pretty good, but Kalu has the Avenger and Mystic traits. Deadpool has the Mercenary and X-Force traits. We just saw Hugin and Moonin, who's got the Aerial, Asgard, and Bird traits. Vivian is another one with 3. She's got Aerial, Android, and Champion traits. Android and Champion, again, being traits that are not going to overlap very much with other allies we might want to play. So, right, we can build around this a decent amount, but really, if you think about, the latter example I said, where you're just sort of putting this in a natural, like, ally recursion deck, how good is it actually going to be? And I think the answer is it's still really good there. Like, so let's assume we're playing Maria, Mockingbird, and Nick Fury. That's the shield and spy traits. Pretty good chance that isn't going to overlap with our hero, unless we're playing another shield spy character, like Nick Fury or Maria Hill. But let's just say we're playing an Avenger, maybe an Avenger with one other trait, or a Guardian with one other trait. Like, that's, the shield and spy allies are going to not be redundant with that. Then we've got Kalu, Avenger, Mystic, just a staple, good ally to play. Beast, Genius, and X-Men, just one of the best leadership allies, very solid. Professor X, Psionic, and X-Men might overlap with Beast on the X-Men, but Psionic is a good unique trait. We mentioned Vivian. Vivian's just a staple. Android, Champion, Ariel, pretty little risk of overlapping. I mentioned Deadpool is ready as well already. Deadpool is not like as crazy of an ally, but still very strong. And it's got the X-Force and Mercenary traits, which are not overlapping. And sort of, you could go through this exercise, like, there's a good amount of allies with, non-overlapping traits that just make a really solid deck. Like, I don't think you need to necessarily play stuff like Atlas Bear, or other like Posse, or, Hero for Hire, allies, that are a step below on the power level, just so you can get those extra traits. Like, I don't think you need to do that to make Strength and Diversity an excellent card. And kind of what I should have said earlier, I think, but really, think about this deck. Like, the Ally Recursion Leadership deck is one of the strongest decks in the game, because allies are extremely efficient, rapid response and call for backup to help you get them is extremely efficient, command team working with the temporary allies is extremely efficient, but it's all built around your allies. And there comes a point in every one of these decks where it's like, okay, I've got all these ally cards in here. I need to fill like 3 to 6 slots with like events or non-ally stuff, because like I am going to actually hit my ally limit and waste some value as I'm like discarding allies so that I can play an ally from hand, without using that ally to block. And so an event like this is exactly what leadership has always lacked. We've got Lead from the Front, does okay. I guess Avengers Assemble, maybe if you're in the Avengers deck. But Strength and Diversity, this is really the first leadership event that I'm like really, really happy to fill out the last few spots in my ally heavy deck with, as just like that thing to do when you've got your full allies already, that's going to give you pretty good value. And, like I said, very often 5 or 6 points of value, can even get up to 8 in my video where I played Falcon with a Strength and Diversity deck. I got 8 points of value a few times playing that. So just a phenomenal card, exactly, filling a hole that leadership needs. You don't even necessarily need to like build your whole deck around it, maybe just change and, swap out an ally here or there, kind of side. Don't downgrade your allies a huge amount to play this, but just kind of side, change some staple ally into Deadpool, right? Another staple ally, but just with 2 traits that are probably unique. And this is just going to be a very strong, mid to late game card in your deck. Obviously, it's super efficient, right? In the sense of like, you're not going to waste any value, right? It's increments of 1 threat and 1 damage, which is just incredible. Pick up, deal minions exactly as much damage as they need, remove exactly as much threat as you need from side schemes or the main scheme. So it's not even an attack. It's not a thwart, so you can do it while you're stunned or confused. so many little things like that this card does. Now, I will say, I'm not as big a fan of this going to multiplayer, so, we can get a pretty good mix of allies in a solo deck, as I've just described. But even getting a second player into the game, there's no way to get around the extra cost. Now this is going to cost 4. If we're adding 2 to the cost, then our partner has to be contributing, I would say, about 4 points of additional value for this to be worth it. And in order to get 4 more unique traits that are not redundant with traits that you already have in your play area, you start to make some pretty reasonable sacrifices in the quality of allies you're playing. Now you can maybe stretch it, like it might work. You can get some guardians in there. Maybe it's like a guardian hero. Maybe the hero has some, maybe it's Venom with the Space Knight trait, and it's like, okay, you're pretty safe there. But I think it's a little bit tighter to squeeze, especially if they're not like warping their whole deck around, satisfying your strength and diversity. I think it gets quite a bit worse in 2-player, and then that problem gets even harder at 3 and 4 player. So, but I think it's just a game-changing card in solo. So there we go, my number 1 card from the Falcon Hero Pack, Strength in Diversity. If you are a newer player, perhaps you don't have some of the reprints that were in this pack, so I'll go through them fairly quickly. But if you're, like I said, if you have a smaller collection, you'll be interested in these reprints as well. If you've played with them already, you might have some opinion formed. But for the newer players, let's just review them quickly. So first we've got Cloud9. This is a 3-cost leadership ally with 1 thwart, 1 attack, 3 health. And this is the one that I mentioned is the mirror of Arrow, who buffs our aerial characters' attack. Cloud9 buffs our aerial characters' thwart. So same thing, if you're going to do like the all-in aerial, this is a payoff you probably want to support that, but, requires other characters in play, which makes it a little bit less valuable. You're not always going to do a lot the turn it comes down, especially if it's like the first ally you play, but does have a high value ceiling. So if you're going for the Flight Squadron, Arrow, Air Supremacy package, Cloud9 is definitely going to be included in your deck. Last ally here of the pack, we've got Adam Warlock, 3-cost leadership ally, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 3 health, aerial and mystic traits. Response: after he attacks or thwarts, discard 1 card at random from your hand, and then you get a different effect based on the printed resource on that card. So when you go through the math on this card, you actually do hit your baseline efficiency, right? He's a bit understated with the printed thwart and attack, but then you're spending a resource from hand to get 3 points of value, which is quite strong. Generally, 1 resource should convert to 2 points of value. So then we get like 1 extra point of value, which is kind of making up for the thwart and the attack being 1 point shy of what they should be for baseline efficiency. So, it's sort of a convoluted way to get to basically baseline efficiency. Plays a little bit better with healing, I will say. But just, in general, just kind of a straight baseline card, a little bit of randomness in it, so probably not as great as just some of the staple allies in the game that we could play, but he's there, he's aerial, so probably worth including in your all-in aerial decks. Then we've got a leadership support, the Triskelion. This is in the core set, so you should have this already, but increases your ally limit by 1, which can definitely be a useful card. Can be a bit win more, so watch out for that. Like, what's the game that you're winning with 4 allies that you weren't going to win with 3 allies? Fairly rare, but can be a nice peace of mind in some cases. And lastly, the Power of Flight. This is a resource card that doubles the number of resources this card generates while paying for an aerial card. So double resources, always strong. Strictly worse than Energy, Genius, and Strength, of course. You can play up to 3 copies of this, so that's starting to get pretty resource dense. So I definitely would want to have a lot of aerial cards that I could spend on this. You probably want some aerial cards in your hero itself, but just playing a lot of aerial allies, playing some air supremacies, you could get enough value out of this that it could be worth it. But someone like Angel, right, this is a phenomenal card in the Angel deck because of all the aerial stuff you have going on. Falcon, of course, has lots of aerial events, so this is great with Falcon. You're going to know when you want to play this if you've got a high density of aerial cards. So nothing too hidden about it. It's just a solid resource generator. So there we go. And with that, that brings me to the end of this player card review for the Falcon Hero Pack. Let me know if you disagreed with any of my comments, if you would have ranked things a bit differently. Of course, I'm going to be more interested in hearing kind of how you might have used these cards or what situations these cards might have been beneficial, as opposed to the actual 1 through 5 ranking. But let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.